I'm just thrilled to have here at this journey into healing Dr. Mimi Guarneri. She's just an amazing soul. As you'll see, she's just, as you'll see from her bio in the binder, just a wealth of knowledge, and she's been a pioneer really in the field of integrative medicine. She's a board-certified physician in internal medicine, cardiology, cardiovascular disease. Her book, The Heart Speaks, is just a beautiful book, and she speaks about reversal of heart disease. And also, she's boarded in integrative and holistic medicine. She's the president of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, past president of the Academy of Integrative and Holistic Medicine, the American Board. Sorry, there's so many credentials, it's hard to get them all out. American Board, and she serves on the founding board of the American Board of Physician Specialties in Integrative Medicine. And we have some flyers in the back. They're having their conferences coming up, and it's really a great organization bringing validation to really a board certification for the specialty of integrative medicine. She co-founded the Scripps Center for Integrative Medicine and was medical director there for 15 years, and also currently co-founder of Guarneri Integrative Health and has a clinic, the Pacific Pearl, down in La Jolla. And apart from all that, she's also founded the Miraglow Foundation, which does, it's a nonprofit organization providing medical care in India, just a beautiful organization. She goes there once a year. Hopefully we'll speak a little bit about that. And I've had the pleasure too, she's just an amazing spiritual being, and I've attended a few of their full moon pujas at the clinic there at the Pacific Pearl. So she's really the embodiment of everything that we've been talking about, and really shifting the face of healthcare here in America. And so it's really my extreme honor and our privilege to hear Dr. Mimi Guarneri.
Thank you, beautiful person, beautiful Sheila, heart to heart, heart to heart.
Let's just stand here all day and hug.
I love it, I love it. Although this carpet is so nice, I might just want to lie down, and I almost don't want to step on it. It's so wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to share the journey that I've been on personally to some extent for the last, I guess it's about 20 years now. And I have spent my life looking at how I can enhance not only my own health and well-being, but that of my patients. But it wasn't always that way. You know, I started my career here in the cardiac catheterization lab. And to be honest with you, in the 90s, it really didn't matter to me if someone was eating vegetarian or meditating or anything. What really mattered in the 90s to me was whether or not I can fix a vessel that looks like this. And the key piece I was missing in this work was not asking the simple question, why does someone have a vessel that's diseased like this, right? And what have I not done as a physician? So many, many years and many, many stents later, I will tell you today that this is a miracle of modern medicine to be able to restore blood flow to the heart, the big, beautiful heart, which I happen to think is the most important organ, and to be able to say that this person can go home and not have the same kind of discomfort and shortness of breath and suffering that they had prior to coming in. So this was a miracle to me of modern medicine. But it's also the limitation of modern medicine. So when you think about it, we're trained, those of us who've gone to medical school, we're really trained in acute care. We're not trained in preventive medicine. We're not trained in a new model to handle chronic health problems. What we're trained in is, what is your chief complaint, right? What got you here? Our brain then goes into this thing we call the differential diagnosis. Chest pain, is it a heart attack? Is it acid reflux? Is it a dissected aorta? Is it a pulmonary embolus? What is it? This is how our brains go. And then we put a treatment plan into place, which is usually drugs, surgery, and imaging, a diagnostic and treatment plan. That's how we're trained. This is where we're really good. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, really, if you get hit with a truck, I mean, I know I'll be saying Om Namo Narayani until I get to the hospital, and right until they put the anesthesia thing on my head, you know. But I need to be in the trauma center. So this is where they're good. But what we know today, and what we're being warned about over and over again, is that chronic disease and the way we're treating people is just not working. So in 2009, the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum was smart enough to say chronic disease is the most severe threat to global economic development. And if you take a look at the recent data from the World Health Organization, it's a constant reminder that even though we put in 400,000 bypasses, 1 million stents a year, 3 in 10 deaths are related to cardiovascular disease, which they go on to say is totally preventable. So if we know this, I've always asked a question, why aren't we putting the science of health into practice? We're so good at putting the science of disease into practice. Try this stent, try this drug, try this new surgical technique. But the science of health almost gets completely ignored or paid lip service. It just doesn't happen. The World Health Organization is telling us non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is expected to rise by 50% in 2030. And we keep going around about this with the same way of thinking and the same way of treating, and it's just not going to work because the system's already starting to shake. 10% of the world's adult population has diabetes. 1.5 million deaths in 2012. Don't worry about flipping through the slides. Those are just the slides that had to be submitted. But what about the rest of the world? It's much bigger than what's going on right here in our country. 3.6 million children under the age of 5 die each year. 8 million deaths are due to indoor and outdoor air pollution. No one ever taught me as a cardiologist that cardiovascular disease risk factor is air pollution. Right? That was not on the list of cholesterol and blood pressure, right? So we were trained to think like this in what I like to call silos. I'm in the cardiology silo. I have colleagues in the rheumatology silo. I call these the ologies: cardiology, rheumatology, nephrology, neurology. And our patients just tend to go from silo to silo, pick up a few drugs in each silo, and that's what we call practicing medicine. And it just doesn't work. Because we end up with a model that looks like this. Everything we hear, what is your complaint today? Oh, my knee hurts. Oh, that's osteoarthritis. We name it, right? So first thing we name it. We blame it. That's why your knee hurts. You have osteoarthritis. And we tame it. Here's the pill. So everything has an ill to the pill thinking. And I think we run the risk when we talk about integrative health in medicine to not think that that's about supplements. Because then we have the ill to the pill on one side, and we have the sick to the supplement on the other side, right? So I think, for me, what began to percolate is, it's all of this. If I'm going to give an ACE inhibitor for blood pressure, and an NSAID for knee, and an SSRI because I'm depressed because I'm taking so many bloody drugs, right? And then I have heartburn, so I'm going to give something for that. Well, I can spin this around and I can say, well, I'm going to give white willow, I'm going to give Rufia extract, I'm going to give St. John's wort, and I'm going to give slippery elm, DGL, and a host of other things, right? Or I'm going to get to the underlying cause of what's going on. And that, to me, is really the essence of integrative health in medicine, is why do we have this, and how can we reverse the process? So this poly pills for poly ills, it's here. It's on TV all night long. Don't watch TV, by the way, unless you watch like a really inspiring movie or something good like that, because it's not good for your immune system or your endothelium, and that has been proven. So the gross domestic product looks like this. Pharmaceutical industry, United States is numero uno up on top, spending more money than any other developed nation. And by the way, one of the things that's really scary to me is that if you take something as simple as antibiotics, 71% of our antibiotics go where? To animals, right? And then we wonder why people have antibiotic-resistant diseases, which the World Health Organization, by the way, is claiming is its #1 thing to prevent. The World Health Organization is terrified right now by antibiotic resistance. That's how big it is. And I'm not against pharmaceuticals when you need them. They can be life-saving. But when we start to use them as a way of life, every ill to the pill, it to me doesn't work. And it's not working for our economy, and it's not working for our lifespan. So you might say, hey, we spend all this money, we have all these antibiotics. Take a look. On your left is the amount of money spent. On the bottom is Mexico on healthcare. In the middle are countries like Australia and Sweden. And look at us, way out, we're the outliers. We're way up on top there. And then you follow the next line down to your right-hand side. That's life expectancy. So we're spending all this money, and we're not necessarily living longer. And I believe that the reason this is that we're spending money on disease care, and we're spending no money on health creation. And we're forgetting the wisdom of the global healing traditions. Every global healing tradition, whether it's Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, teaches us to keep people well, right? The best physician, the best health practitioner is one who keeps people healthy, not one who just treats disease. Well, this kind of stuff scares me. If you're not familiar with the World Watch Institute, it's worth a look because it says something about our consciousness. I mean, where are we putting our money? How are we spending our money? The amount of money needed each year to provide reproductive health care for all women in developing countries is $12 billion. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, $12 billion. That's the same amount of money we spend on perfume in Europe and in the United States. Let's just put it into perspective. The amount of money needed each year to provide basic health, nutrition needs universally in the developing world is $13 billion. The amount of money we spend on pet food in Europe and the United States is $17 billion. So I don't believe for 1 second that we can't feed the world. I don't believe for 1 second that we can't bend the curve, the 2-degree curve that we desperately need right now for climate change. I believe it's greed that's blocking us from doing this. And I think everyone in this group is consciously awake or awakening, and we have the power as individuals to make decisions about where we spend our money, how we spend our money, what we support and not support. Do we support fair trade? Do we buy certified humane, or whatever it is that we do? We have the opportunity to be awake in our decisions. And so I hope that we can all be part of this. Now, the Journal of the American Medical Association, that small journal, right, they know exactly what's going on. They know exactly what the issues are. They say, medical education should prepare students for the clinical problems they will face in their future practice. But that is not happening for the most prevalent problem in healthcare today, which is chronic disease. By the way, medical schools should be teaching everyone to meditate the second they walk in the door. Right? And medical schools should be serving nutritious food. And of course, I'm biased toward a vegetarian diet, but it's kind of scary what goes on when you're in that environment. So our colleagues in the medical profession know there's a problem, but we're all trying little tiny solutions, and I really believe it's going to take a global grassroots movement, and we're going to say we're not going to take it anymore. Sort of how I feel today, I'll just say it about our government. I feel like I'm not going to take it anymore, you know? And that's just my political statement, and I'll move on. But the nation's current health trajectory is lower in success and higher in cost than it should be. The cost of inaction is high. And this is Harvey Feinberg, Institute of Medicine, president. The cost of inaction is high. And I don't think we're taking appropriate action. But I think all of us in this room, as practitioners, as health seekers, as consumers of health care, whatever role we play for ourselves, for our family, for our clients, for our patients, we can all be the difference. Well, Mark Twain said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So in the 90s, I was putting in 700 stents a year. And I have to tell you, it's kind of an adrenaline rush when you do that kind of stuff. You get the stent in, the arteries open, and I'd reach over to my patients and I'd say, you're fixed. You're going to go home tomorrow. Everything's great. Well, of course, I just fixed, 12 or 13 millimeters of a coronary artery, forgetting the rest of the entire body and the individual, and how do we prevent this problem in the first place? I didn't know what I didn't know, right? And sometimes we have to be big enough to recognize that, humble enough to recognize that, comfortable enough to put our ego on the side and say, maybe there's something else. And that awakening came to me one day when I was coming literally out of the cardiac cath lab, and Dean Ornish, anyone know Dean? Well, does Dean take no for an answer? If you know him, the answer is no. And Dean said to me, I see all these patients you're stenting. I want you to teach them meditation and vegetarian diet. And I looked at him, I said, you're crazy. I don't know anything about meditation, vegetarian diet, and yoga, and that's not me. I'm putting in stents. And he said, I think you could do this research study. I want you to take some of those really sick patients you have, and this was the 90s, that you can't put stents into, and I want you to run this research protocol. And I'll share a little bit about that in one slide later on. But I started to wake up to what I didn't know. Because when you come out of medical school, you think you know everything. And when you come out of cardiology fellowship training, now you're walking on water. You really think you know everything. And then all of a sudden you realize you sink like everyone else. So I started to think about my patients, and I began to realize that 70 to 90% of everything I see in my practice is related to lifestyle and environment. And we'll talk a little bit about genetics, but genetics, you inherit your book of life, right? And you get 23 chapters in that book from your parents. But the epigenome is what chapter you read. How do you live your life, right? So lifestyle and environment accounts for anywhere from 70 to 90%, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's diabetes or hypertension, cardiovascular disease, fatty liver disease, all of these things that we keep labeling so we can bill the insurance company. I love this little study that came out of the archives of internal medicine, because these researchers sort of went in and they said, something's funny here. There's an Amish community. Everybody has the gene, thrifty gene. They should all be obese, but they're not obese. Any guesses what they concluded? Yeah, hard work, walking 18,000 steps a day. The researchers said, wow, your genes are not your destiny, right? You can change that. That's powerful medicine. Ornish's work in prostate cancer. A little hard for you to see here, but on the left, the pre-intervention group. And I know you've heard a lot about epigenetics, which is great. But prostate cancer, Gleason 6, men are classically told, let's do some watchful waiting. What the heck does that mean? Watchful waiting. What do I wait for my cancer to grow? Or what do I do? And so these men were taught a vegan diet, yoga and meditation, exercise, group support, very similar to what we did with heart patients in the 90s. And it's hard to tell, but on the left you see a lot of red. Those are oncogenes that are turned on. Post-intervention on the right, you see hardly any red because 500 oncogenes, cancer genes, were downregulated with lifestyle change. So for many, many years, I've said the mystery or the mysticism deserves a mechanism. And we didn't really have the mechanism. Like when we did the heart research in the 90s, and we said patients lose weight and their cholesterol comes down, and we had a 91% reduction in chest pain. And for every dollar we spent, we saved $6.66. And people were like, yeah, well, that's nice. People were less depressed, and so on. But now we're starting to understand it through the language of science. And this is the game changer. So when you think about all of the things that go into making up one's life, it's about the environment. What kind of toxins are we exposed to? Persistent organic pollutants unequivocally are linked to diabetes and obesity. That's been proven. So when you start to look at states where atrazine is used in everywhere, and these are like the belt of states right now in the southeast, where greater than the population is 40% of the population is obese, right? Is it related to the atrazine? For the first time ever, I saw a commercial last night where it was a lawyer who came on and said, Monsanto's Roundup is linked to lymphoma. Has anyone seen this commercial? Whoa. That's pretty amazing. So the health of human beings is so connected to the health of the planet. It's no different than, when Chief Seattle says it's the web of life, and what we do to the one part of the web affects all of us. And yet we think, oh, that air pollution over there, that's in China, right? That air pollution is in India. We have one planet, and we are all citizens of planet Earth, right? So for me, it's become really important to look at all these elements of health. Yeah, nutrition is another one. And what do we do with the food? What kind of drugs are we putting into our body? What kind of emotional traumas have we experienced in our life? Vince Folletti, is anyone familiar with his work? So Vince Folletti is a local physician here who works in the Kaiser system. And he was given the job of getting people in the Kaiser system to lose weight. So Vince was given all these people that weighed, 300 or 400 pounds, and his job was to get them to lose weight. So he would put them on liquid diet and all these things. And one day, a woman who had lost 168 pounds attempted suicide. And he tells his story. And he didn't just brush it off. He wanted to know why. And he called the woman into his office and he said, would you please tell me what happened? And she said, Dr. Folletti, you took away my solution. He said, what do you mean? She said, I carried that extra weight because I was raped as a young woman. She said, that weight was protecting me from men. I was terrified to have a man come near me. And then when I was at the photocopy machine, a man came over and said, wow, you look really good. You lost a lot of weight. Maybe we should go for dinner. She said, and that was the click. And that led to what's called adverse childhood events research, in which he has 18,000 plus people looking at how events in our childhood affect us later in life, addictions like drug abuse, alcohol, food, and so on. And it's fascinating research to read. And anyone who's working with clients, these are not sometimes topics that people like to talk about, but as you get into that space of healing and that space of trust, right, when this comes up, people start to make connections that are really important in their healing process. So traumas in one's life, smoking, radiation, all of these things, how we respond to stress, how we respond to tension, are we depressed? What kind of attitude do we have? Are we doom and gloom? Or are we someone whose glass is always half full? All of these things interact with our genome, and they determine whether or not we're going to be well or we're going to get ill. So when I look at a list like this, and I have colleagues who think everything could be solved with Lipitor or Crestor, it's such a small, small piece of a true holistic model which embraces body, mind, emotions, and spirit. So we know complex diseases cannot be ascribed to mutation in one gene. It's not about one single gene mutation. They arise from combined action of many genes, environmental factors, and risk-conferring behaviors. And that's where we do our work. How do we impact the epigenome by changing environmental factors and risk-conferring behaviors? I really like this. This was in JAMA, believe it or not, in 2008. Current understanding of the course of chronic disease is that there is no one cause for any single disease. We know that. We need multiple safe shots on the goal, a system that's more personalized, more lifestyle-driven to the individual. That's what I love about the Ayurveda approach. You know, again, as a cardiologist, I had to keep scratching my head because I treat a lot of atrial fibrillation, right? So I would see this one aspect of atrial fibrillation, which was a typical overweight person with sleep apnea, high blood pressure, and AFib. That's the classic. And then on the other side, I'd see the skinny gal, right, with a lot of creativity, and a blood pressure 90, and they also had atrial fibrillation, right? And I could never figure out what the heck was going on. So I decided it must be related to solar flares or something like that. And then, which may be part of it, but then I did my training in Ayurvedic medicine. I did a health practitioner's course, and I realized, these are all the Vatas that are having AFib, right? And I completely changed my treatment protocol for those people. Because what these women it was almost always women, they kept coming, but a fair number of men, I shouldn't say, but they would come and they say, they put me on this beta blocker, I feel terrible. Well, they were treating the same way for two totally different types of people, and it really was the Ayurveda training that helped me to understand this simple little, it was like the key in the lock of understanding these patients. Well, our genes haven't changed, genes haven't changed very much in 10,000 years, but what we do in our environment has changed greatly. And the environment is not only the food we eat, it's the air we breathe, it's who we eat with, it's who's our community, our tribe, right? It's everything. So our biography is truly our biology. And this was one of the first things I had to learn when I was doing that research in the 90s, right, is really to understand someone's biography. Anyone here trained in healing touch? Okay, we have a few. Well, I'm a healing touch practitioner, which I use a lot in my practice. Remember, we were trained to do something called a trauma interview, right? So in medical school, they teach you to do something called, what's the present illness, right? But we never were taught to go back to when did this start? What was going on in your life? What was happening emotionally, physically? What kind of stresses were happening? Did a relationship break up? Did a child or a parent die? We were never taught to think that way. And it wasn't until I did the healing touch training that I realized we need really to go back and look at where someone's health challenge began, because it usually didn't begin that day. Certainly not a chronic health challenge. I love this paper, Deepak, the Epigenetic Mechanisms of Integrative Medicine. Thank you for you and Paul Mills and the team doing this, because again, through the language of science, we're starting to understand how we're impacting the epigenome. And we sort of knew this. Like, we knew that if you decide to eat a sticky bun, you produce proteins that are pro-inflammatory and pro-thrombotic. We know this. We also knew if you decide to eat sardines, you're probably producing anti-inflammatory proteins. But what we're now starting to understand is if you consume turmeric, for example, you're going to rev down NF-kappa B, which is going to lower all of your cytokines, your pro-inflammatory cytokines. right? So we're starting to understand it in a way that we never did before. So it's not only the Ornish work showing that 500 genes are down-regulated through lifestyle, we also can understand this now, and I know you've heard about this, through meditation, right? Through nutraceuticals, and so on, through food. So Thomas Edison said, I love this, the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest her or his patients in the care of the human frame, in a proper diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. Right? Funny, it came from Thomas Edison. So this was an old slide that I stole from Dean Ornish from the 90s, because I really felt like this is what I was doing for many years, mopping up the mess. You know, people come in having chest pain, quick run, put the stent in, bring them up to the ICU. We did nothing to turn off the faucet. I cannot tell you how many times I would go up to the ICU and someone just had a stent placed and they were eating a roast beef and mayo sandwich on white bread. Does this sound familiar? Right? I remember once seeing someone after open heart surgery. I walked in to see him, and he said, I am so nauseous. And I looked down at his tray, and they had served him, after they extubated him, beef stroganoff. All right? So this disconnect between lifestyle medicine, right, between the science of health, is huge. We keep going with the science of illness. And that's why I'm so glad there for conferences like this. So we need a holistic model that looks at the whole person, like happens here, the Chopra Center, body, mind, emotions, and spirit. We need a transformational educational model, which is what we're doing with the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, but also a model that teaches each and every one of us differently and gives us different tools. Health coaching, and group education. I learned this group education when I did the Ornish work. I have to tell you, I never had any exposure to that. And all of a sudden, patients would be sitting in a group, and they would be telling their stories, right? And they would be opening their heart. And this was not opening it with bypass. And these patients would come together 3 times a week for 4 hours. That was what the research was, for 4 hours a day. And they bonded. And if someone had a problem and had to go into the cath lab or go to the hospital, they didn't go alone anymore. They went with their 15 cohort members, right? Cohort, we call them cohorts because that means band of warriors, right? So it was a whole, and people helped people. As a physician, it was so beautiful because I got to stand in the back. They only asked me when there was a problem what to do. The team was a yoga instructor, a nutritionist, a psychologist, an exercise physiologist. I was the window dressing in the back if there was a problem. And you know what? It works. So a different way of thinking is desperately needed. So personalized medicine, yeah, I want to use personalized medicine. I use it in my practice every day, especially when it comes to giving people medication. I just had a 12-year-old girl who was brought to me by the grandmother. They said, Dr. Guarneri, we want you to see her. I don't usually see children. She tried to commit suicide. Let's look at what was going on. She was put on Prozac because she, quote unquote, wasn't behaving right. When we looked at her genetics and her pharmaceutical response based on her genes, the SSRIs were the worst possible drug you could have given this child, right? So I do believe we have to have personalized medicine, but medicine that's also preventive, participatory. We can't do this alone, right? We have to work together with our clients. It's a partnership. No more of the day, or I'm the doctor, do what I say. You know, I was trained by cardiologists who would smoke cigarettes in the hallway, right? And then they'd have that, you know, smoke all around them, and then they'd walk into the treatment room, and they'd start yelling at the patients for smoking cigarettes, right? It doesn't work that way anymore. We have to be the models. And how do you teach if you don't know? One of the biggest challenges I had when I started this work was I didn't know how to meditate. How was I going to teach meditation if I didn't meditate? So right away I had to go learn to meditate. I wasn't a vegetarian when I did the Ornish work. In 1 week I became a vegetarian. I felt like my body went through some sort of withdrawal. I mean it. Because I thought, if I don't do this with my patients, how could I ever teach it? Right? So you also have to be a partner in that way. So I like to think about it this way. I think that, and I do this with my patients, I say, they come in, they say to me, oh, I have this, and this. Patients are great at naming their diseases, right? Oh, I have fatty liver. Oh, I have high blood pressure. Oh, I have diabetes. I say, okay, here's a tree. Put every one of those little diseases on the tree. We're going to make it a piece of fruit. And then they put it on the tree. I said, what do you want to do now? You want to go up and cut off all your branches? Or you want me to bypass your branches? Or you want me to drug every sick piece of fruit you have on that tree? And they sort of think about it for a while. And every now and then somebody says, cut off the branch. But most people, I say, if your fruit is sick, what do you want to do? They said, I want to feed the soil. I want to give it more water. I want to give my trees sunlight. Now we go to the bottom of your tree and we say, okay, so your fruit is named diabetes. Let's look at your micro, macro nutrition. Let's look at your physical activity. Let's get you off the persistent organic pollutants that are linked to diabetes. Let's get you sleeping right. Let's get you meditating. Let's look at how you respond to stress and tension. Let's look at who your tribe is. Let's do all of the work in your soil, and it doesn't matter what label is up there because the same program is going to apply for your diabetes, for your high blood pressure, for your heart disease. And the patients get this. Sounds simple, but they really get it. So I want to do away with all these ridiculous silos that we have. For me, it's not anymore about whether it's, we started with cardiology, dermatology, gastroenterology. Then we got into this whole thing of, I practice holistic medicine. I practice functional medicine. I practice integrative medicine. Oh, forget it, right? If we can all agree on a couple of principles, I think we can all come together and be much stronger together than we could ever be in a silo. So not only do we not need to think about our patients' bodies as divvied up into a silo, but we need to think about all of us as practitioners, no matter what degree is after our last name, right? We can't be in these silos anymore. So when we did the work in the 90s, we used a true integrative model. And I said, I was just in the back. And this is just one slide of a patient with coronary disease. You can see on the upper left, I don't know if this works, so I'll let it be, but on the upper left, you can see his right coronary artery has a narrowing. You can see on the bottom, his PET scan has a big area of black, which corresponds to no blood flow. 1 year later, I think I can convince you that that artery looks better, and certainly the blood flow on his PET scan looks remarkably better. This is coronary reversal through lifestyle change. Right? Now imagine if we had the technology, Paul Mills, and you've heard about this weekend, what's happening if we had looked at everyone's telomerase, right, and their telomerase enzyme and their telomeres and all of the epigenetics, like Ornish did later with the prostate cancer patients. There's no doubt in my mind that it would be profound. But the good news is Medicare now pays for the Ornish program based on this research. And we're right in with what the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are right now. If you're not familiar with these, I invite you to take a look at them. This is what the UN is saying. We need to be focusing on ending poverty and hunger, but right in there with good health and well-being, right? So I no longer talk about disease treatment. I don't care what people have. I talk about health creation. How do we create healthy human beings? And I believe the offshoot of that is going to be a healthy planet. So the UN is with us, and the World Health Organization, believe it or not, has a strategy for traditional medicine. And they aim to support member states, India is one of these with Ayush, to support member states in developing proactive policies and implementing action plans that will strengthen the role traditional medicine plays in keeping populations healthy. This is really important. So now you have the World Health Organization talking about it. You have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals talking about it. You have 2706 of the Accountable Care Act, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, saying if a practitioner is licensed in your state, right, you, as a health seeker, can see whoever you want for your health care challenge, and the insurance companies can't stop you. So if you have back pain, you don't have to just go to the orthopod. You can go to the acupuncturist, you can go to the licensed massage therapist, whoever is licensed in your state. And the only problem with this is it hasn't been implemented. So if we have any lobbyists in here or people into advocacy, take a look at that whole area of 2706. So the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine really came out of, I could say it to this group, I can't say it to everyone, it really just came out of a download one day where this silo thing was really bothering me. And it became clear that in order for us to practice together, we have to work together, we have to train together, we have to be together. And so the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine was born as an interprofessional education and community dedicated to transforming healthcare. And I'll just share with you a few of the things that were really important to me in writing the core values. Healthcare is about health and available to all. I'm a firm believer that healthcare is a human right. Right? Prevention is our foundation. Mechanical fixes are embraced when we need them. Right? Healthcare providers work collaboratively to heal body, mind, and spirit. Sustainability is integrated into our culture, our practice, and our training. So if this is something that resonates with you, right? Like I want to connect this community to Deepak's community. I think if we connect all of us, we're going to have a huge net across the country that no one is going to be able to ignore. In November 2014, Integrative Medicine was made a board specialty. I sit on the founding board of the American Board of Physician Specialists for Integrative Medicine. So we have raised the bar, right? And one of the reasons I actually pushed to do this was because when I would go sit, you know, I was the medical director at Scripps for a long time, like 17 years, felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill. And when I would go and sit with the higher-ups and they would say, your doctors only see 10 people a day. Our primary care doctors see 30 people a day. No one recognizes this specialty of integrative medicine. So it just wasn't working. And that was my main reason for wanting to get involved in this board. So Einstein said, we will never be able to solve our problems at the same order of complexity we use to create our problems, which is something I'm afraid we're trying to do right now in healthcare. So here are just some thoughts. I really think we have to think about health as an economic strategy. The only thing that matters to some people in this world is their money and their purse. Right? And I believe we have all the research we need. Here's one of the original Lyon heart studies, 70% reduction in death and recurrent events on a Mediterranean diet. We have all the research we need. We have all the science of health that we need to transform the health of this nation. But what we don't have is the lobbying and the money to deal with some of these other pieces, like, quite frankly, the food industry. Right, but we can change consciously what we do. This was the Hale study, 70 to 90-year-olds on a Mediterranean diet, throwing away their cigarettes and walking, had a 50% reduction in all-cause and cause-specific mortality. And my colleagues in cardiology go crazy when I show this, because none of these are from the Journal of St. Elsewhere, right? They're from JAMA, they're from all the major circulation, all the major medical journals. And I say, what drug can give you 50% low rate of all-cause and cause-specific mortality? Right? The Diabetes Prevention Program, 4-year study, women with gestational diabetes randomized to lifestyle, metformin, and placebo. At 4 years, those who went into the lifestyle limb were less likely to develop diabetes. No surprises. The PreDimed study, 30% reduction in cardiovascular events, extra virgin olive oil and nuts with the Mediterranean diet. Ornish's study. What about acupuncture? I can go through studies, reams of research. This was just one that was in the British Medical Journal, randomized controlled trial, 34% reduction in headaches in people treated with acupuncture, 15% reduction in need for medication, office visits and sick days, all reduced with acupuncture. So then why isn't this available for people as an option? All right. The people that get this, believe it or not, are corporations. Corporations are sort of a little smarter. They said, you know, if we can get our employees healthier, there'll be less absenteeism, there'll be more presenteeism, we won't be spending so much money on drugs, and so on. And this is what the research shows. For every dollar corporations spend, they save $6. So health is an economic strategy. We need a model that embraces human beings as much more than just their physical bodies, right? True health is a balance of body, mind, emotions, and spirit. I received 0 training in medical school. Here I go to 7 years of training to become a cardiologist after medical school. No one ever talked to me about depression and heart disease, anxiety and heart disease, loneliness and heart disease, stress and heart disease, the HPA axis and heart disease, and the list goes on and on and on, right? Depression affects 300 million people worldwide. Fewer than half of these people have access to adequate treatment and health care. The antipsychotic industry is about a $13 billion industry. The antidepressant industry is right up there with it. We have a rising number of children being treated with these medications, right? The former Surgeon General reminds us of the 10 leading causes of illness and death in the United States. All we have to do is modify how we live our lives. And I was really proud to see in this unhealthy, maladaptive responses to stress and tension. Right? So as a cardiologist, the number one thing I see that gets my patients, what emotional outburst do you think gets a heart patient into trouble? Anger, right? Anger increases the risk of a heart attack 230%. And that's from the Journal of Circulation, right? I love this one. This is from a textbook from 1881. It says a chief and primary cause of nervousness, they called it nervousness, is steam power, the periodic press, the telegraph, the sciences, and the mental activity of women. Ooh, it's a good thing I have the stage now. This one says, apparently I've done something to upset you. You know, men and women don't process everything the same. That's just a little reminder. And a friend of mine, you know, gave me this slide, said, oh, I want to give you this slide for your lectures, because I lecture a lot on resiliency and on stress hormones and, you know, and things we can do. And they said, the story went like this: how come the kids are so quiet? Go and see what they're doing. And I give these parents a lot of credit. The little guy on the right, I think he has a pacifier in his mouth with all the paint on it. But I give the parents credit that they right away got a camera and took a picture. You know, this slide for me was from the 90s. And I was thinking in the 90s, okay, I got this thing going with this Ornish program. And this meditation seems to be making a huge difference in not only my patients and myself, and not to mention the yoga practice, because the yoga practice followed by the meditation was really powerful for these patients. So I thought, all right, let's look at the drugs I'm giving people. So the sympathetic nervous system enhances coagulation. We know that, hands down, it's not a guess, makes the platelets sticky, increases fibrinogen, increases homocysteine, right? So what was I giving in the 90s? Aspirin and Ticlet for that. Sympathetic nervous system raises the renin and angiotensin levels. Well, I was giving ACE inhibitors for that. I wasn't thinking much at the time about cortisol and weight gain, insulin resistance and weight gain, but we typically give metformin for that. Then I looked at the research on high cholesterol. And everybody always talks about it coming from animal products. And it's not just cholesterol number, but that's a whole other lecture. I thought, is there any research that stress causes cholesterol to go high? It's all over the medical literature. It's everywhere, right? That stress will raise your cholesterol, adrenaline will raise your cholesterol, and so on. Everybody knows about tachycardia and high blood pressure. So I thought, wow, all the drugs I'm giving, aspirin and Tyclid, ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, metformin, calcium blockers, I thought maybe we need to medicate and meditate. Because this is all the response to the stress hormones on the physical body. This is just a small piece from the cardiovascular arena. And then there was this other piece where people will come in and see me and they say, I know I have a brain tumor, I can't think clearly. And guess what? This was usually physicians, right? Oh, I know something's wrong with me, I can't think clearly. And at the end of the day, after the $10,000 workup, it all comes down to stress, right? So we know poor President Obama was a perfect example of this. High cortisol, low DHEA, accelerated aging, right? Impaired memory and learning. So think about the things you associate with aging. Do you get osteoporosis when you age? Yes. Does it come from high cortisol? Everybody knows that. Gee, I'm going to give somebody steroids. I have to prevent osteoporosis. Does it raise blood sugar? Absolutely. Does cortisol put weight on your midline? Of course. Just think of your Cushing's disease patient, you know? And no one ever makes that little tiny leap to say chronic stress is doing the same thing, raising blood sugar, causing osteoporosis, and so on. It's just a little step to make that connection. So all the things I see in my practice, and when people are under stress, I always ask them, so I have them fill out a little questionnaire, and they answer all these questions about their life, their family, their finances, all the things that are stressful to people. And then I ask them, what do they do? You know, where do they go for their personal strength? And the first one I hear all the time, oh, I go home, my wife and I have a bottle of wine. We go home, we have 3 martinis. Right? I have 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes. All right? I was standing on a line in the airport one day, and, you know, we're all guilty of different things, and this woman came over with a pack of Cinnabons. And I shouldn't have been thinking this, but I did. I thought, well, you don't really need those Cinnabons. And she must have been a mind reader. She was probably a psychic, because she looked at me straight in the eye and she said, I had a bad day today and I'm having these buns. And I thought, whoa, I can't believe it. She got my message. I'm also not very good at playing poker, so she probably just sort of looked at horror on my face. So this is how we're coping with it here, people. You know, this group may be meditating, but the rest of the world is eating, shopping, smoking cigarettes, and so on. So it's really about not what happens in our lives, right? It's not about whether the Dow goes down or whatever activity the Donald just did, or it's not really about that. It's our perception and our response to that. Right? That's what makes the difference, because that's what's ultimately going to determine what kind of hormones we produce. So Mark Twain said, I've suffered a great many misfortunes, most of which never happened. And of course, only you know what you see here. Do you see bats or do you see angels? We all see different things through different eyes. And perception is everything. So I know you heard a lot about research. I'm just going to mention Schneider's TM study, 48% reduction in cardiovascular events, sudden death, MI, and stroke. TM meditation, 20 minutes twice a day. I don't know a drug that can do that. The study we conducted up at Camp Pendleton for PTSD, healing touch and guided imagery, statistically significant reduction in PTSD scores in active Marines. Telomerase activity increase with mindfulness-based stress reduction. Chanting, your brain is on Om. And it's the vibration that transforms the body. So if you're not chanting or haven't chanted, I invite you to turn on the mantras, find a mantra, find a personal mantra, a sacred word. The research is beautiful in this area. Get this, it goes back 2001, British Medical Journal. Improved heart rate variability and sympathetic tone in mantra and repetitive prayer. Jill Borman's work. Right here in the VA hospital, reductions in just about everything from anxiety to improvement in sleep to improvement in well-being in veterans with PTSD who are taught a mantra, right? So there are many things that we can implement in our practice. And I just want to end with one other thought. It says it's the physician's job to amuse the patient while nature cures the disease, right? One of the things that frightens me the most is voodoo medicine. You will be dead in 6 months, right? When somebody comes in with that white coat on and gives somebody a life sentence, it's one of the hardest things for any of us to change, right? So you have to remember what kind of power that has on you, because our energy and our attitude affect each other and affect our patients. This is a beautiful study by David Rakel, where patients would come to the clinic and they either had an empathetic, perfect physician or a physician who made no eye contact, didn't even interact with them. What's your problem? Here's your prescription. Get out. And what they found was you were better off staying home, no visit, in terms of duration and severity of your cold, than seeing a physician with no empathy. All right? Same thing with the antidepressant studies. Take a good therapist, give them a placebo. Terrible therapist gets imipramine. The people who got the placebo with a good therapist had marked improvements in their depression. Same thing with irritable bowel syndrome, right? Wait list, 28% improvement in symptoms. Augmented visit, connecting with your physician, 62% improvement in symptoms. We are the medicine, right? People, for those of you who are in healthcare, people come to you looking for hope. That space where you do your healing is a sacred space. And it's a sacred space where an interaction occurs. And who do you bring to that interaction? Because your energy field is extending out, way out from your body, right? Who do you bring into the room? And if you look at the heart math research, you start to understand pieces, just little glimpses of what goes on. This is a mom's EEG showing in the mom's EEG and baby's EKG overlapping. People's heart rate variability patterns in training during sleep. Partners whose heart rate variability patterns as they sleep begin to go into sync. And I just love Rupert Sheldrake's work. Is anyone familiar with Sheldrake? One or two people. I love to read this stuff. Anyone have a dog? Does the dog know when you're coming home? Well, they proved it. They did 100 videotaped experiments. And they took the owner of the dog and they put her over 7 kilometers away, and then they monitored the dog the whole time, and they found at randomly selected times, JT, the dog, was at the window 4% of the time. But when she told JT she was coming home, JT was there 55% of the time. All right, so your dog does know. When you talk about consciousness, right? What about, I love the twin studies. Identical twins, separated at birth, raised in totally different families, never knew each other until they were in their 60s. Get this, both married to women named Betsy, both divorced a woman named Linda. One named his first son James Allen, the second named his son James Allen. Both had a pet named Toy, and they had vacation homes 3 blocks apart at the beach. Coincidence? Cellular memory? Communication on a level that they didn't know? So I'll end with Martin Luther King, who said it boils down to this: all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one, destiny affects all. And whether it's the planet, whether it's our relationship to the planet, whether it's the people we connect with, whether it's consciously or not consciously, we are all connected in the web of life. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.